Two nations, both drowning in oil wealth, but only one is drowning in taxes. Why are Norwegian citizens, some of the richest on earth, handing over half their salaries in taxes? Why Saudi citizens, surrounded by the same black gold, pay virtually nothing? It doesn't make sense, right? Same resource, opposite systems. But what if I told you the real reason isn't oil at all? To truly understand this strange paradox, we need to go back to the foundations of each nation. Because while oil made both countries rich, the decisions they made after striking it changed everything. We are taught to believe oil makes a country rich, and with that, life should get easier. But Norway and Saudi Arabia prove one uncomfortable truth. What you do after discovering oil matters far more than the oil itself. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll not only understand why Norwegians still happily pay their taxes, but why Saudis might one day have to, whether they like it or not. When you think of oil-rich nations, two countries often come to mind: Norway and Saudi Arabia. Both struck oil in the mid-20th century. Norway discovered its first major offshore oil field in 1969, while Saudi Arabia had already been producing oil since the 1930s. But its real wealth exploded in the 70s during the oil crisis. By the end of that decade, both countries were swimming in petrodollars. Today, Saudi Arabia holds the second largest proven oil reserves in the world, while Norway, although much smaller, is one of the top exporters of oil and gas in Europe. Yet, despite having the same black gold beneath their soil, their economic realities couldn't be more different. In Norway, citizens pay some of the highest taxes in the world, up to 38% income tax plus VAT, fuel duties, and corporate taxes. Sounds painful, right? But here's the twist. In return, Norwegians enjoy universal healthcare, free higher education, and one of the world's best welfare systems. Now compare that to Saudi Arabia. For decades, citizens paid no income tax at all. The government funded nearly everything from fuel subsidies to healthcare to housing, all provided by oil revenue. Life was quite literally tax-free. But that's where the paradox lies. How can two countries with similar wealth sources build such opposite systems? Why would Norway choose to tax its people when it didn't have to? And why did Saudi Arabia build an entire economy that depends on oil but doesn't ask much from its citizens? The answer isn't just about oil. It's about how each country used it. And that decision, made decades ago, changed everything. When Norway discovered oil in the North Sea, it faced a choice: spend the money now or build a system for the future. Norway chose the harder path. And that's exactly what made it so successful. Instead of letting oil companies keep the profits, Norway created one of the world's toughest tax regimes for the petroleum industry. Oil companies in Norway pay a staggering 78% tax on their profits. And yet, companies still invest because Norway offers political stability, world-class infrastructure, and transparent rules. But here's the genius move. Norway didn't blow the oil money on flashy projects or quick popularity. In 1990, it created the Government Pension Fund Global, better known as the Oil Fund. It's the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world today, worth over $1.6 trillion. And here's the catch: the government can only spend a tiny portion of the returns each year, not the fund itself. This approach created what economists now call the Norwegian model. The oil money is taxed, saved, and reinvested, and then used to fund healthcare, education, public pensions, and infrastructure. Now you might wonder, why would Norwegians accept such high taxes when their country is so rich in oil? Simple. They see results. Public services work, corruption is low, trust in government is high. When citizens believe that taxes are being used wisely, they don't mind paying them. Norway proved a powerful truth. Oil didn't make it rich, smart policies did. The wealth wasn't just in the ground, it was in these choices they made above it. While Norway chose long-term planning and taxation, Saudi Arabia made a very different bet, one that shaped its entire economy and society. For decades, the Saudi government operated under a simple social contract. We won't tax you, and in return, you stay loyal. Funded by massive oil revenues, the state provided nearly everything: free healthcare, education, cheap electricity, heavily subsidized fuel, even government jobs for most citizens. And for a while, it worked. Oil was booming, money was flowing, and life was largely tax-free. But here's the problem. This model depends entirely on high and stable oil prices. When prices crash, like they did in 2014 and again during the 2020 pandemic, Saudi Arabia's budget takes a direct hit. Suddenly, all those services, subsidies, and public sector salaries become harder to maintain. Another challenge: Saudi Arabia relies heavily on foreign labor to run its private sector, while many locals prefer guaranteed government jobs. This creates a fragile system, one where most productivity comes from outsiders and most citizens depend on the state. As oil revenues fluctuated, cracks began to show. In 2018, Saudi Arabia introduced a 5% value-added tax, something once unthinkable in a country proud of its tax-free identity. Fuel and electricity subsidies were cut, and plans to diversify the economy, like Vision 2030, gained urgency. But changing a system built on decades of oil-funded comfort isn't easy. Youth unemployment remains high, and the private sector still struggles to absorb new workers. Saudi Arabia's oil gamble to subsidize now and worry later worked for a while, but now later is here, and the kingdom faces a tough question. What happens when the oil runs low, or worse, becomes irrelevant? Oil didn't just fuel economies. It shaped how entire governments operated. And nowhere is this clearer than when comparing Norway and Saudi Arabia. Norway is a stable democracy. Its leaders are elected, its media is free, and its people actively participate in political decisions. This means the government is held accountable. Citizens demand transparency, and policies must serve the public interest, not just the powerful few. So when oil was discovered, the Norwegian public insisted that the wealth benefit everyone, not just elites or foreign companies. Laws were passed, debates were public, and the entire oil strategy was built on long-term planning, oversight, and citizen trust. Now compare that to Saudi Arabia, where political power is concentrated in a monarchy. Decisions are made top-down, often behind closed doors, while the royal family has directed vast resources into infrastructure and development. There's little room for public debate, criticism, or accountability. This governance structure led to a different kind of oil strategy, one focused on short-term stability over long-term sustainability. With no strong pushback from citizens, the oil money was used to maintain loyalty and avoid unrest, not to build a diversified future. And that brings us to a powerful economic concept: the resource curse. The idea that countries rich in natural resources often end up with weaker economies, corruption, and slower development. But Norway escaped this curse because its institutions were strong before oil arrived. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, fell into the classic trap: easy money, little accountability, and a public disconnected from the real cost of their lifestyle. Oil can lift a nation, but only if the system behind it is strong enough to handle the weight. So what happens when the oil runs out, or when the world simply stops needing it? That's no longer a distant question. With the rise of electric vehicles, global climate goals, and renewable energy transitions, the world's demand for oil is expected to shrink in the coming decades. For countries like Norway and Saudi Arabia, the future after oil isn't just a hypothetical, it's a challenge that's already begun. Let's look at Norway first. Even today, oil accounts for only about 20% of Norway's GDP, down from nearly 50% in the early 2000s. The rest comes from a diversified economy: shipping, tech, hydropower, tourism, manufacturing, and more. The real ace up Norway's sleeve: the government pension fund Global. Their massive sovereign wealth fund, now worth over $1.6 trillion. This fund is so large that it could theoretically pay every Norwegian citizen over $300,000 and still have money left. But Norway doesn't do that. Instead, it uses only a small portion of the fund's annual returns to support public spending, ensuring that future generations benefit as much as today's. And because of strong institutions, low corruption, and high public trust, Norwegians are confident that this money won't be wasted. In other words, Norway is already living in a post-oil world, and it's doing just fine. Now contrast that with Saudi Arabia. The kingdom's bold reform plan, Vision 2030, aims to reduce oil dependence by investing in tourism, tech, logistics, and more. Projects like NEOM, a futuristic megacity, are meant to attract global investment and diversify the economy. But here's the catch. Over 70% of government revenue still comes from oil. And even now, oil money is used to fund mega projects and maintain public services. The challenge for Saudi Arabia is cultural as well as economic. For decades, citizens were told that oil would provide everything. Changing that mindset, introducing taxes, cutting subsidies, and encouraging entrepreneurship isn't easy. And while progress is being made, it's a race against time. So let's go back to the question we started with. Why do Norwegians pay taxes but Saudis don't, despite both being rich in oil? And the answer now becomes clear. Oil is just a resource. It can give you wealth, but it can't give you wisdom. What matters is how you see it. Norway taxed wisely, saved wisely, and spent wisely. Saudi Arabia offered comfort first and is now paying the price of catching up. One planned for the long run, the other assumed the oil would never stop flowing. So maybe the real wealth of a nation isn't buried underground. Maybe it's in the policies, the people, and the patience to think 50 years ahead. Because in the end, oil runs dry, but smart decisions don't.